with that being said, we've got plenty of you in the room. I think we've got 1.2K of you in the room. And so let's just get started. For those that have missed the intro, Anthony and I are going to be your hosts today. We're going to be the ones flexing with these auto layouts. And then we also brought on our product design team here, and they're going to be helping us out by answering some questions in chat, as well as being able to pop on and answer questions on the screen as well if we need that. So with that, let's move forward. Auto layout, let's roll out. I hope you appreciate my Transformers joke. I love it. Okay. All right, so where did we get here? This is kind of a big question. And since I've actually been using Figma for well over 3 years, I actually know how we got here. I remember designing components and buttons in the old way, but let's kind of talk about the old way. Let's go back to well before auto layout. And this is how I might have created a button. So in my design panel here, I've got a frame, and in this button, you can see that I've just got some text here. And within this frame, I've added some constraints here. So I've added a center constraint and a center constraint. And this is kind of how I made my buttons. Another way I used to make my buttons is I would just draw out my, my text expanses to the left and right there. And then of course I would set my constraints to be left and right here. And so what would happen is as I would scale this button, that text would actually resize and fit into the button. Now the button never would grow vertically, so there was always a little bit of a problem there. The other thing is we always didn't know, like, what if I needed 32 pixels of space right here? Like, how would I get that? And like, would I have to always measure? If I resize this button to this big, would I measure? And like, what if I accidentally made it that big? So there was a lot of complications with this. And that is just example in one singular button. But this issue also permeated within other constraint-based layouts. So in this case, let's say we created some sort of a card component. I would do the same thing. I would have frame on the outside, and then I would have some objects on the inside, and I would have them set up to constraints. We have this image to left and right and top. So that works out great, right? This is working out super perfect. When I first discovered constraints, my mind was blown, and I thought, like, this is the way. This is, I think that was a Mandalorian joke that I did not mean to make, but I'm so excited about myself right now. So the other thing is we would do things like this, like we would set up another frame inside with constraints of left and right. And then of course I would have these icons on the right with a constraint set to right. Now there's problems with this. Why are there problems with this? Well, as I add text, you can see that this doesn't get pushed down. So in a real world situation, when I'm designing, I would add a third line of text and I'd have to scoot this down just a bit. Then I would have to come in and measure, holding Alt and measure in between just to make sure everything was good again. The other thing is, what if I took out one of these icons here? I took out an icon, nothing adjusted. So now I would have to come in here and of course come back in and adjust again. And this is really demonstrating the issue of why auto layouts needed and why it's so important. So now just a quick example before Anthony really starts blowing our minds. But what is the auto layout way? Well, the auto layout way is essentially taking a frame with some contents in it, can take off auto layout here and then add it back on. And then of course, when I start typing in, this is what we want to see. Now, all of our padding is appropriate. It's correct on the left and right. And if for some reason I needed a little bit more padding on the left or right, I could of course add that padding here like this. And this just makes everything so much easier, so much more consistent, and everything's in sync. Now, when we hand this code off to developers, I hate that word actually, I wish it was we felt like we were a little bit more together, but when we communicate with our developers about this, it's gonna be so much easier now to be consistent. They won't be asking, why is this padding 34 pixels on one side or 32 on the left? So this way, it's much more consistent for that code to hand off. The other thing that happens with auto layout is that when you start taking out items, you can see that the layout here will respond. If I start adding text, what happens? Everything responds. What if I actually change the width of this? I need to make it a little bit adaptive. My button is changing as I need it to. So this really is the auto layout way. This is the way that makes our lives so much easier and not have to do all of these sort of like very tedious tasks of realigning things on the screen. With that being said, Anthony, it's off to you.
Awesome, yeah. And Roger, I think you brought up some really great points there too. One of the things that it always blows my mind how much of this we were able to do without like how many amazing designs we made without auto layout before it, and then what we were able to do now. And I can't even imagine doing work without it at this point.
I mean, before auto layout, I was in love with constraints. I was like, this is the most mind-blowing thing ever. Like, I
Yeah.
loved it. But yeah, now I can't imagine life without it.
Right, right. And it's one of those things where I always like to think about auto layout as kind of like, it's like the ideas of constraint and smart selection, but all wrapped up into a really nice, responsive a tool that you're able to, again, build really responsive components, but also work, again, as you mentioned, better with your other teams, right? If you have copywriters that are coming in or anyone who needs to add copy, and you may not have an understanding of just how big that component is going to end up at the end, this really lets you make that a lot easier. So
that's a really good point too about the copywriters. I hadn't really thought about that. Like maybe they may not know to like sort of hold alt and measure and make sure that the padding and spacing is right. They're just putting copy in. So good point, man.
Yeah, cool. So before we go into the details of the tool today, I want to show what we're going to be building, what we're going to be looking at. And so we all know what we can do with auto layout today. And here's the things that you'll be able to be doing from here on out. Things like a resizable lists are going to be a lot easier. Items where you have an item on the left-hand side and you want to have other areas of content that you're able to put next to each other as well. Distributing items across rows as well, so that you can see we can have things that are anchored to one side versus the other as we go through this. Some really awesome things around distribution and stacking and how we look at this kind of stuff. So you'll see things like these graph elements here that we're able to create, face piles, or in our case, cat piles, because everything has to be cats, as well as tables. We're gonna look at some really cool examples with tables and some of the fun stuff that we can do there as well. Again, with auto layout, we get to some really new properties that are gonna make this a lot easier to build these types of things, and not only build them, but actually maintain them as well, which is one of the most important pieces. And lastly, of course, some key examples when it comes to things like media boxes and feeds and sort of layout style things. You can see all the different types of auto layout properties that are happening all at once right here. And for whatever interesting ways that people were accomplishing that before, you're now able to do this with much simpler tools and a much easier interface to work with too as well. And then obviously some really cool things around nav examples and some interesting ways that we can use these properties all together as well. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into, we've sort of broken this out into 4 areas, right? So as you're working through auto layout, you're going to see several different properties that are all going to be working in concert together. So we're going to walk through those right now. And we're going to start with resizing, because resizing is probably one of the most important parts with auto layout, and you see it all of the time. So as Raji was mentioning, resizing is going to cover everything with how the outer elements and the inner elements relate to each other and how they dictate their size and how they move around each other as you're either adding additional content or actually resizing the outer frame as well. Most common example, something like a button. So, my awesome button. The content itself, the outer button that has the auto layout on it actually resizes when the content changes. And this was something that was doable before, and you'll notice now that the property name looks a little bit different. In fact, we now have a new property here called Hug Contents, and it has to be my absolute favorite named UI feature that we have. Just, hugs. I miss them. So you'll see here that Hug Contents is really going to allow you to have this will reproduce that same effect that you've had before, where you just want the text to grow with your content. Let's look at this with a little bit more advanced examples too, and we're going to talk through the different properties. So Hug Contents, again, we're going to be talking about the fact that there's an auto layout on each one of these individual items here, and we're going to walk through each variation of the properties. So for Hug Contents, you'll see this is set to both hug vertically and horizontally as well. So hug the width and then also hug the height as well. So that's what's causing this here to shrink around the text that we have. You can even see it represented in this little diagram right here, where we have these arrows that are pointing inward, basically saying, I want you to shrink around the content. We also have, if we apply, instead of hug contents, if we apply a width context to this, we can actually say, fixed width, fill vertically. So what we have here is, instead of hug contents, we're actually going to switch to 2 different properties that we have. So one is going to be fixed width, meaning that this is now whatever width I decided to set for this child element. And then also fill height. So you can see here that within our auto layout container, we actually have one of these children spanning the entire height of the container while also retaining a fixed width. So this is something that was not easy to accomplish in the earlier versions of auto layout. So one of the new powerful things that you'll be able to do is actually set not only a variable width or height and a fixed width or height in the other direction as well. Again, same idea here, but we're reversing the direction. So now I can have something that fills the container, but also has a fixed height as well. It does not need to extend to the top and bottoms. And lastly, one of the more interesting ones, and I'm actually really excited to see how people use this one, because I don't even think I have thought of all of the amazing ways that we can use fill in both directions, because fill in both directions is a pretty powerful feature if you think about it. This will basically expand to the available area within the auto layout that we have here. So let's go ahead and actually look at how these react when I change the parent container. You'll see here all of the different properties of those resizing properties working together and the different ways that they are applied, right? So hug contents stays hugged, fixed width and fill vertically, we're able to grow that. And then again, fixed height and fill horizontally, we're able to grow that. And then lastly, we have a container that will just fill all of the available space that we have there. Now there's one important thing that I want to note here. Two of these properties, when you apply them and you have a parent container, let's say we have a simple container like this and we've got an auto layout on it. Also, quick note, this purple dotted line is just a purple dotted line. We're not working with variants today, so I just want to make that clear for everybody. I'm going to actually just turn that off right now, just for a second. So you'll notice here that on this outer container that has auto layout applied, we have a fixed width and set to hug contents. So this is actually going to, let's do it with hug contents and hug contents. If you have it constantly hugging the contents like you would with a like auto layout as you've used it before, one interesting thing is that on the child element, if you were to actually adjust this to be fill container, you'll notice here that I'll get a little notification saying the width was set to fixed for the parent container. That's because fill and hug can't actually really work too well together because they're sort of canceling each other out. So you'll get a quick notification if you try to set fill container on an inner element because it's going to say, okay, well, the outer container now has to at least define the size. One of these things has to be defining what the size is, right? It's either the inner object or the outer object. So when you see that notification, just know that that's exactly what's happening there as well. Cool. So let's go ahead and move on to the next big area that we have, which is distribution. So we've had some examples of distribution in the older version of auto layout, right? The idea that elements can have properties between them. So you basically have the idea that, that there can be space between child elements within your auto layout. So we still have that today, but now with a few more additional properties as well. So you'll see here that for distribution, we now have the ability to pack things. So here we go. We actually have, this is probably similar to this is very similar to the one that we actually had before, right? So this is the ability to say, I want a fixed amount of space between each of these items. So here, again, much like the space between UI that we had before, I'm able to just adjust the space between these items. We're also doing something fancy with alignment to get this centered, but we'll get to that in a minute. But you'll see here that I'm able to adjust the space between much like we had before. The new property that's exciting is that we now have space between. So if I were to go into our new menu here, this menu contains things for alignment and distribution as well. There's some overflow menu for certain properties that we need. You'll see here that I'm able to change from packed to space between. So now we're actually saying, I want you to fill all of the available space that we have in between. So packed is going to work like the original version, and space between is now going to be something that'll actually take up all of the available space. So again, think menu bars, think anything where you're going to want to be able to distribute evenly across things. If you need additional space on both ends, you can simply create a frame for that as well. Lots of interesting ways that you can use that. Here's a really cool example where we have a packed layout right here, where we're actually packing these in and actually saying that these should all be spaced out evenly. But then we've actually put them inside of another container that has space between with an icon on the right-hand side. So we kind of get both at the same time. We have packed items on the left, all staying left aligned. And then we also have a an icon on the right, and we didn't have to define right and left alignments for this kind of stuff. We're able to just use that space between feature to automatically push them to both sides of the layout. Now, there have been some questions around how can we do some things like, get things to be a little bit even closer together. I'm not going to go as far as to call it negative values, but there are ways that you can create things like face piles or cat piles in this sense. What we're doing here is we're basically pushing that space between to its extreme, right? Where we're instead of doing something that feels like normal spacing between, you can actually push that even further and get these stacks to sit on top of each other. And again, if you wanted to use this in another layout, you can just simply wrap these things in a frame, and now you have your space between area that's actually everything is collapsed. Same effects you can do with things like action bars and items as well. So you'll see here that this is just a generic space between option that we have, right? That you can apply. But again, much like in the other example here, I'm able to actually I can actually use alignment and a few other things to actually center these items. We're doing a couple interesting things with some different padding here as well. Raji, I don't know if you want to mention what was going on that one there.
Unmuting now. Yeah, one thing I thought of too in the cat pile example, some of those tricks with auto layout that we knew before where we use our arrow keys, those still exist. And even in this situation where they seem to have a negative margin or they're overlapped, you can still drag them within there. So keep that in mind, that functionality is still available there. I believe this action bar here was as a way to give an example to, actually, this one I moved into the next example,
great.
So I'll handle that one.
Awesome. Well, I will pass it off to you and we'll go from there and check out padding.
Great. All right. Well, Anthony, thanks so much for that. That was awesome. Let's talk about independent padding. As we knew it before, padding happened in auto layout, and we'll just do a quick example with some rudimentary text here. I'm going to actually call it rudimentary text. And we're going to add auto layout by hitting Shift-A to this text. Add a background so we can see what's going on here. Maybe we're making a border radius or something like this. Now, previously, this is how it worked, right? If we wanted to up our padding here, could scrub on this field if we wanted to add more padding here, it would just be like this. We would have horizontal padding and vertical. And now, of course, we just have this one field. So you might be a little confused asking, oh, well, where's that horizontal and vertical? That's moved over into this menu here. So we can see a representation of all the padding around here, but now we have independent padding on each of an auto layout frame. So say we wanted 16 this way, but we wanted 32 here, we could do that like this. Now, if you're a super smart person and really savvy and love little tricks, which I'm sure all of you are, you could also do this right in this one field. So remember, we're remembering the order top, right, bottom, left. And as a front-end developer, I remembered this. But I could put in 32 and 16, and that's going to be top and then right here. So that's a shorthand for all top, all vertical values, and then all horizontal values. Now I could also do it this way, top, right, bottom, left, and that would actually translate into this here. So I know y'all like to work super fast and you like those little shortcuts. So there we go. Now we've got this idea of independent padding. So I know you all probably have great ideas of how you would use this, but this was probably a good example to me. Say you've got this kind of a button with this round icon here, and you really want this to be like, to feel like it fits perfectly snug within the arc of that border radius there. The problem with this is that with that padding of 8 here, this looks great on the right, but this not so much. So enter our independent spacing values. We could actually start bumping up values here and see what looks good. And this is a really great example of like where we might actually use something like this without actually having a spacer component in there. We could just adjust that independent padding on this field. Mm-hmm. Another good example of something like this is, and I always ran into this creating auto layouts, is say we wanted the space between on this card vertically to be 16, but maybe with this button here or this text, we wanted to actually adjust the spacing for this one element. Well, the way we can handle this now is that I can actually just wrap this in an auto layout frame here, if I'd like. So if I do that, I can also just group it here, or frame it, sorry, I'm framing it, and add auto layout here as well. But I can just adjust the bottom spacing for that. So maybe I want a little extra spacing there. This is a lot easier now. Now I didn't need to drag in a spacer component there. So another good example of why I might use independent padding. All right, I'll share this last example here for independent padding. Let's say I've got this action bar. It's a little bit similar to the things that we've looked at. We've got this action bar set up, and let's look at how we have it set up. So right now, what I've got, oh, thank you, just getting a little coffee delivery. The way that I have this set up right now, if I turn off fill container on this child and I just say hug contents, you'll see what's happening, that this icon here actually scooted all the way over. And this is the really brilliant part about this fill container setting, is that it'll fill up all the available space. Sorry guys, my mouse is not working too great. Okay, but then let's enter into this scenario here. In this case, it's not centered. Like I kind of want this symmetry where there's this icon on the right, icon on the, like a balance on the left, and then this is all centered. So the way that I sort of balanced that and got this to be symmetrical again is that I just simply added an additional spacer on the left there, additional padding here on the left, and now everything's perfectly centered with this one overflow icon on the right. So another great way we can use independent padding. I'm thinking I'm gonna pause just for a second, Anthony, in case we've got questions that are related to this. Have you been noticing any in there?
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions coming in so far right now. I know that there's some questions coming up just around as far as locking aspect ratios and things like that. And this isn't going to be part of that. So it's good to just to point out that you can still use some of the existing tricks that we have today for sort of making that work the way that you want. We know it's an important thing, but just for this one, we're going to have it. You'll want to just continue doing it the way that you've either been sort of, kind of making it work. I know that there's some really fancy things out there in the community too for how people are accomplishing that, but not in this launch right now.
Okay. All right. So yeah, why don't we do it this way? Let me just keep on blazing through these examples, and then we'll have a lot of extra time at the end, and then we can bring on the product team as well. How's that sound, Anthony?
I think that sounds great. Yeah.
Great. All right. So I'm going to move through. We see all your questions. We see you. Thank you so much. We're going to get to you. We're going to talk really quickly now about alignment. Previously, when we were working with auto layout, we were able to align by the children. So we would come into an auto layout frame here, and we would come in and independently align these things here by using the alignment panel up here. Now, what you may notice here is that we're going to have a messaging like this. Alignment is now controlled from the auto layout parent frame. So no longer will we actually align from the children. We're going to go to the auto layout frame, and this works like a default implementation of Flexbox would. So when I come into here, I can actually change this alignment. Now, keep in mind, this is not just a visual representation, it's also interactive. So we can actually align everything to the center, to the left. Now, we didn't get to see what that left looked like, but if I actually change this to a fixed width, you can actually see that, and we change this one from fill container to hug contents, do this. Well, that's kind of ugly. There we go. Let's give you a little example here. We can see we can actually align in this fashion here. So we can all center align, we can all left align, etc. Now, the one question that you may have, and I think it's something that I had when I first started learning about auto layout, which is, that's great and dandy, but like a lot of times we have a scenario like this, where like, I want that avatar of this beautiful cat, and I want this name and this post update here all to be vertically aligned. But when I resize vertically this way, I really want this sort of this arrow that gives me more information, takes me off. It's a little bit like an iOS cell. I'd really like for this to be centered. Well, no longer do we have that ability, right? Like I can't just center this, I can center everything. So a quick way just to show you about how we can do that would be if we took this icon here and we simply just add a frame around it. Now I'm going to use the command option G. That's my shortcut for creating a frame, wrapping this with a frame. And then I can just tell this, let me see if we've actually got auto layout on this. Hey, let's add auto layout to this. And let's set this one. I would love this to be fill container, fill up all the space. This is going to be fixed, and this is going to be fixed. That's great. Let's test it out. Does auto layout work? Perfectly. Now with this frame here, I'm going to set it to fill container on the vertical axis. So now we can see a preview of what's happening here. Now we remember our old frame tricks, right? Our old frame tricks are that we can center anything just by centering it here and then setting our constraints to center. So this is one way for us to go about creating a centered element with non-centered other child elements. So these are vertically aligned to the top. Another way that we can go about this, I'm just going to duplicate this here. Another way that we can go about this, instead of just using a regular frame, you could of course use an auto layout frame here and just set that to center here. And then make sure that your auto layout frame is set to vertically fill container. And this should have the same exact kind of behavior here. So two different ways to get at this. I was going to say skin a cat, but I really feel like that is off brand with all these cat examples.
Roger, we had a good question come in just sort of around, can we use decimal values in our spacers and all these types of things? And I will just say yes, absolutely. In fact, much like any of the other values you're going to have, most of the values you're going to have in the inspect panel, you'll get 2 decimal places that you can use. Beyond that, it is going to start rounding in different directions, but you can certainly add that.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Cool, great. All right, and then lastly, we'll just talk about putting this all together. So the way that we're going to do the rest of the stream is we packed in a bunch of time to just go through examples and demonstrate things on the fly. That's why we do these live. That's why we have Q&A. So I want to talk about the table because I just like the table and I'm proud of it. But with the table, what I've done is I've set up the whole container of this table as a auto layout vertically. And you can see here, if I'd like to add more padding to this table, I sure can. I can also set spacing between my rows if I'd like to. Now with my rows, as you might imagine, they're going to be set up as an auto layout frame and they're going to be horizontal here. So I've set 32 pixels of space in between the children. That's all great. Key here is that each one of the rows I've set to fill container. That'll allow me to fill and stretch to the container's bounds, whether or not I try to manually resize this or I use hug. I want this to fill up this container completely. That's the way a table row works. The other thing that we've got, and this is really the holy grail, right? Like where we were struggling with auto layout was like, how do we create a fixed element on one side and then a elastic element on the other side? And that was always really difficult. We used multiple nestings of horizontal and vertical together, auto layout containers. It was a lot. But this is really, really easy. I'm just going to take out this one row of our little Pedro possum, and we can see here that we've got this photo. Now, this photo is set to hug contents, but the contents aren't changing here. I could just as easily set this photo to fixed width and fixed height. We can see here with this text, it's set to fixed width because I just expect that there's going to be maybe 2 characters there. I don't need for this to elastic and expand. It's just a simple number. And then with these 3 items, what I've done is set them to fill container. So with this fill container here, these should actually be elastic. So this really is a lot of what we were looking for with that holy grail layout. Now we've got this table that's able to stretch, and you can see that all of our content here stretches as well. And the other thing is like, does this work? Yes, absolutely. We can add a bunch of data in there and that just works. Now we may see like, oh, I want these to be aligned vertically. With this row, of course, we can come in here with our alignment, set everything to vertical, and off to the races we go. So yes, yes, Anthony, like this was cool. When I built this table, my mind was a little bit, it was burning up a little bit. But once I got the hang of it, I thought it was so incredibly cool to be able to do this. So yeah, really great. I'm gonna come in here really quick and just show what that fill looks like. I'm duplicating my columns here. And as I duplicate those columns, you can see that each one of those columns is just filling out the space. Now, lastly, oh, go ahead, Anthony.
Real quick, you just did an amazing little trick that I want to make sure that everyone knows about.
Yes, share it.
I want to give a shout out to, hold on a second here. Yeah. Just give a quick shout out to Gavin McFarland, who I think was the one who actually showed this yesterday, and I'm just going to grab for 1 second here. You'll notice what Raji just did there, how he was able to just grab that column really fast. Well, this is actually just a combination of how we use nested selection as well. So if you hold down Option and Command or believe Alt and Control if you're on a PC, you can actually grab columns and rows individually like that. So if you just do the normal outer selection, you're going to get the rows, but this will give you the inner column or the inner row, and you can even do box selections like that as well too. It's super cool stuff.
It is. And honestly, I was like 1 week ago years old when I learned this trick too. So I'm always learning things, and mad props and kudos to our development team who's constantly thinking about these things, and to the community who's giving feedback saying, hey, can we do this? And then they're like, oh yeah, let's do it. What's really interesting about that technique is the way that we specified this table here.
Oh, do you want to share again?
Oh yeah, no problem. Let's do that. The way that we specified this table is that it's just rows, right? So naturally and intuitively, you would say, oh, we can only duplicate this way. But if we look at this and I just take this one single text area within this row and I duplicate that, you can see what's happening. It's not in sync with all the headers and everything, but that's what happened when we held Command or Control and then selected these, is that it's only individually selecting each one of these elements. And when we duplicate, it's duplicating within that row. So that's kind of the magic and the tricks behind all of that. Anthony, why don't you share and show us a little bit about this this cat app, this Mustagram, since I talked a lot about the table.
Absolutely, yeah. So again, this is, as we were talking about in the beginning, right? We're looking at all of these different features in concert together, working at the same time right now. So if we can see that if we work from the outside in, we can get through different layers of what we actually have set up here. So for starters, on the outside container, we basically have if we look over here, you'll see that we've actually got a couple of different things going on. We even have a fixed scroll bar here. So we're actually using that fixed position just for our nav bar at the bottom that we have. And then we have
Anthony, you want to go ahead and share? That way we can
am I
see
not
all your layers.
Jeez, no, I want you to all to just listen to me and not see anything.
Just infer what those layers would be.
Exactly.
All right, I'm stopping. Go for it.
Going back to this example here. So you'll see here that we've actually got fixed, hold on a second. Is this just not sharing? Oh, that's what's going on. A little bug there. Hold on. Aha. Fantastic. So you can see here that in this example that we've got, we're sort of bringing everything together. So we've got a fixed nav bar at the bottom. We've also then have, within our fixed nav bar, we are using some of that distribution for getting our icons, our tab buttons spaced out evenly as we want them. From there, you'll see that in our scrollable area, so in our collection or our feed or whatever we want to call it, you'll see we've got quite a few different types of auto layouts happening at once. First of all, we've got a pretty standard one that you'd be familiar with, which is that the vertical direction, and then everything is basically just stacked one after the other. We are using that left and right property here too as well. So what's nice about this is that this feed, if I wanted to use this in other contexts, so if I just wanted to grab just the muse there, like that, if I was actually going to use this feed in other contexts, by having that left and right property, I'm able to actually get that nice resizing so that, let's say if I wanted to be designing this for larger phone sizes, or if I was actually putting this maybe in a sidebar, or want this to have like an expanding menu in a chat or something like that, I'm able to quickly do that. And again, that's one of the things to keep in mind here, is that alignment is now on the parent, not just on the individual children. So you can simply just select the parent and get that. If you need those individual alignments, you can use that auto layout trick that Roger just showed a minute ago with the extra frame on the inside as well. From there, as we work our way in, you'll see that, again, we're using some more of those same properties where we've got the two items next to each other with the top alignment. And then as you know, these items will stay next to each other, which used to take quite a few frame layers to accomplish, but now we can just do it all directly in one because they can each have different properties for their fixed heights and whether they fill their container or not. And again, same ideas that we've looked at here a couple of times as far as how these different elements distributed here as far as across the frame, and then everything just stacked normally. So again, much easier to create these types of layouts. You can do it with a lot fewer frames than we've been using before. So huge improvements on this end. A couple other things that I just want to talk about, because I know we haven't gone there yet, is just into the inspect panel a little bit too, and actually looking at kind of some of the stuff that we're actually creating here when it comes to the auto layout. So you may be familiar with that inspect previously with auto layout would generate Flexbox properties for you. I know that there's a lot of questions as to why don't we just call this Flexbox, or why don't we just call this CSS or anything like that. From Figma's perspective, we are a design tool meant for all types of designers. And I know a lot of people out there are probably front-end designers that are working in web applications and doing that kind of stuff. But we do want to make sure that we are being inclusive of all types of designers. And it's really important for us that we don't really just want to become a UI for CSS. That kind of can be limiting when you're thinking and when you're trying to really push the boundaries of what we can accomplish. So we do try to have a little bit of separation there, but you will see that these properties are going to be listed with the flex directions, and you'll have all of the new Flexbox properties applied when you're doing the CSS. And also in that new inspect panel, so all of the updates that we launched over the last couple months or so, you'll see that you actually get your directions in a way that you can. It's a little bit more platform agnostic. So if you just want to communicate what's supposed to be happening, you can now see that really easily here as well too. Yeah, Roger, anything to add on that one, or?
Yeah, we did have a question that was related to this. So essentially, how do we get the labels fixed in scrolls? Can we demonstrate setting up a fixed position thing within a frame? It's outside of auto layout, but I feel like we can still talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to have something that's fixed, what first thing that you're going to need is that if you grab an object like this, let's say we want to have this entire nav bar stay fixed while the background is scrolling, all you have to do is select an item, and then it's going to be right below the constraints and resizing. You're going to see an option that says fix position when scrolling. It is in the design panel, not in the prototyping panel. So you might want to just double check to see that you're in the right space. But what this will do is, as we're scrolling the frame, this will actually keep that fixed there. Now, what's interesting about the way that we have this one set up right now is maybe you can't see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off clip content, but you'll see that there's actually content that goes beyond the edge of the frame. So if I turn off, let me turn that back off again for a second, but you'll notice that on the entire frame, we actually want to make sure that we actually have this set to a little bit longer here. Hold on a second. We're kind of using two different tricks at once here. So there's different ways that you can do fixed and scrolling for these types of things. But if we were to actually just make this outer frame a bit longer here, like this, what you're seeing is the content going underneath that frame right there. This will actually allow us to scroll this entire frame now, and we can actually have a fixed nav bar right there. So if we go to present this one, whoop, you know what we have to do? That's what I messed up there. Hold on 1 second. Get my menu bar back. There we go. Okay, so let's actually, we'll do it from this example here. You're gonna wanna also make sure that you have overflow scrolling on for this too. So what we're gonna do is apply overflow scrolling in a prototyping mode like this. We're gonna say vertical scrolling. And you'll see here now that we actually have a fixed area that scrolls. This is using it a little bit differently because we're technically putting the overflow on the parent container. Another way that I would recommend accomplishing this is actually making this an isolated area with its own scroll space, so that you don't actually need to use the fixed or the fixed position while scrolling. Fixed position while scrolling is really great for things like top menus, or if you want to have call to action buttons or the fab button, right? The floating action buttons and things like that. But this would be how you accomplish that as well. So cool.
Cool. All right. Well, I've got another example, so I'll go ahead and share.
Oh, yeah. Why don't you grab it?
Yeah, I feel like we're starting to get these questions coming in, and so I'm going to do a few examples, and then we'll get to the product team as well. One thing that I realized that we didn't do, and I feel like I saw some of the questions that were around this, is like, this is that frame from the old way. Remember, it's all constraint based, and everything here is just set on constraints. So I just want to take this really quick and turn this into a fully working auto layout frame. So what I'm going to do first, and this is risky, is just click the plus button and see what happens. So Figma tries to figure out, we call it auto magical, but it tries to figure out the spacing and everything based off of the contents in between, and it did a pretty good job. So I'm just going to adjust a few things. I want 16 pixels spacing in between, 32 is great on the outside. Let's see, is this good enough? Like, well, so far, not so good. This text is bleeding out. So what I'm going to do is start from my elements and go from the top down. So on this one, instead of a fixed width, because you can see what's happening here, I really want this thing to just expand and always hug the edges of the parent. I use the word hug, but I want to say I want it to fill the container horizontally. So I'm going to fill that container horizontally. Now with this one here, we can see we have a group of icons within there, as well as a frame around the name and the profile. That's fine, we can go with that. But what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna turn this group into an auto layout group, and Figma tries to figure it out and goes, oh, let's do 68 pixels. Oh wait, that's because I deleted the one icon. Nope, I don't want that. I want maybe like 8 pixels. Okay, now the next thing I wanna do is on the parent profile frame here, I'm gonna add auto layout. It's gonna be horizontal here as well. Spacing between, we also just wanna be 16 here. Now what's happening? How come it's not expanding fully out? Oh, it's because we're hugging the contents horizontally. So I'm gonna hit fixed width here, or I'm sorry, fill container here. So it'll completely fill, but we haven't told this element how to behave either. So I'm gonna take this element here, I'm gonna say this is gonna fill the container. So this will just push everything over until we hit the width here. That's perfect. Last thing I wanna do is just center everything vertically. We're done there. Let's move on to the text. The text I wanna be fill, you're starting to get it now, right? Like fill container. Now I don't want fixed height, because if I have fixed height, we still have this problem where the text bleeds out. So what I want here is to hug the contents. So remember that vertically, this text area, I want it to hug the contents, which means resize according to all the contents inside. Aha, perfect. Now we're almost done. Let's get to this button. For this button here, what I'd like to do is just add auto layout to it. And we'll leave it as is mostly, but I want that text centered. So I'm gonna do center here, but I can also tell the text if I want to. I could fill it out horizontally here if I want to, so I could do that. So there's a couple of different ways. So right now what I'm gonna do is go fill the container this way, and then on the text, I'm also gonna say fill the container as well. And then I'm gonna come in and get rid of these huge paddings because Figma assumed these paddings, and I don't want those. I just want 16 padding all around. As I select my text, you can see, oh, perfect, it's working. It's filling out the container. Now let's give this a try. Does it work? It works, woohoo! All right, so that's kind of a rebuild from the ground up of something that's a little bit more complex. All right, I think it's Q&A time. I'm gonna go ahead and wait and see. Let's get some questions in.
We actually had a great one come in, and I just want to, I'm going to do a quick example of this one. So the question was,
perfect.
Can you actually have other objects? Let's see. Hold on, I saw that question come through. Oh, might have been dismissed. But basically the idea is can you have one object's height dictate the height of the other objects? Can other things grow to expand to fill the height of another one? And the answer is absolutely. In fact, I know that the team went and put a lot of work into this one to make this actually work correctly. So let's take a look at this, right? So if I have something like, let's say I have a card row where I've got 3 cards and I want to basically have this one expand. Let's say I have additional text in this one. And from my design perspective, I actually wanted these ones to extend as well. It's funny because you used to have to actually hack this in CSS quite a bit too to get it to work the way that you wanted it as well. Now, as far as all you have to do here is you can basically take the fixed height of any of the other children and just say fill container on those as well. So again, just applying a lot of the same principles that we've been looking at so far, and you'll notice now that this will actually dictate the height of those other containers, which is pretty powerful little technique there. So.
Love it, love it. And remember, I'd love to have our product design team go ahead and start sharing video now and be ready to unmute because I love having them here and I would love for them to be able to answer some of these questions too as they feel they can. And I think we've got one that's good for that. Oh, I just saw it.
I got one, a short one while you're finding it.
Go for it, man, go for it.
So there was one question from the product team that I accidentally clicked answer live at the beginning and I didn't mean to. And the question was, what other language did we use around like deciding on hug contents? The user was curious to see if like there was any other things that we explored.
Hey, I'm Emily. I can take that. That's a really good question because that's also one that stumped us for quite a while. But in short, we considered so many different options. For example, shrink, auto. We were also considering auto for fill contents at some point as well. So that says something about that option. And through a couple of rounds of user testing, hug was the one that resonated the most, surprisingly, and like entertainingly. And that's eventually how we got to it.
I love it because in 2020, I feel like we all need a hug. So it just feels so perfectly timed. I, lo- I just chuckled. It was great.
Yeah, we have a lot of internal jokes about like parent frames, hugging their children frames and whatnot. There's a ton of family jokes in here somewhere.
Let's throw a few more questions at you. Yeah, it looks like Martin's going to answer this one, but when would you not use auto layout now?
If you just want to move around quickly and you don't worry about sort of things aligning, if you just want to draw things, sketch, you know, whatever, just without sort of worrying how it is in code. It's actually one of the big parts of Figma is supporting all sorts of modes of design or all sorts of ways people design. And, you know, some people really want the, you know, staying very close to code and making sure you actually can't do anything that cannot be easily expressed in code. But some people just want to grab, you know, the pencil tool and sketch around and not worry about what's going to happen next. And supporting both is important. So that's why we actually have this very quick way to go in and out from auto layout, just to support sort of both of these modalities.
Love it. Okay, I've got another question. I'll go ahead and do this example. Maybe Anthony can handle the next one, but the question is around how would you adjust for individual spacing between elements? So I'm just going to grab a couple of icons here, just copy them. Let's see if I can remember the page I was on. Okay, so in this bar, let's make sure it's set up on auto layout. Great, it is. Let's have them all centered. But in this case, we have 0 spacing between. So let's say we space it out a little bit more. Maybe it's like 10 pixels between, but we know maybe this one we want to be bigger, but we also want a little bit more padding around it. So the way that I would approach this is primarily first resize that element to whatever the size you want it to be. 64 seems great. But then the next thing, let's say we needed a little bit more breathing room around that. What we could do is that frame trick. So we just can create a frame around this object, and I'm going to set this to auto layout here. Now, previously people would use spacers. There's nothing against that. You can absolutely do that. But now with independent padding here, what we can do is put like 16 on this side and 16 on this side. So this will still hug the contents. It will still resize as you're resizing this icon. Say we want that icon to be even bigger. It's one of those big iOS icons right in the middle of the screen. We can still do that, but maintain that independent padding on either side. Yet for the entire frame here, for the parent, we only have 10 pixels space between. So that's my answer for that one.
Mm-hmm. That's great. We did have another just quick one that I'm going to show an example for, which is the how. So the question is just around minimum widths. We don't have minimum widths as a built-in feature right now, but there is a pretty practical and not very invasive way to actually do this in your designs as well. So I'm going to just show a quick example of that one. Basically, if you have something like a button like this and you want to have a minimum width, it might be compelling to go in and actually set this to fixed width, because it might appear like you did the right thing. You're like, oh, right, yeah, cool. Now that's the minimum width. And then if I keep going like this, but you'll notice that fixed width will cause the text to just move on to the next line. So you are going to want to probably just continue what you're doing today if anyone who's using this trick. But what you can do is basically, we're going to set this to a vertical layout, and I'm going to add in a spacer element. Now, again, I will just say with these types of things, if you're going to use these in production, just make sure that any kind of workarounds or tricks that either your team understands them, that you understand them. I tend to stay away from anything that's rather complex, because there's a great analogy of like there's always 2 designers working on anything, or always 2 programmers working on anything at the very minimum, because it's at the very least it's you and past you, and you have to be able to remember what you did in the future. So I'm going to add in a spacer element here for this one, because this one's rather simple, so I don't mind it as much. I'm going to make it bright pink so you can see it for a second. And then what this will let me do is this will let me have a minimum width, so that if I actually have less content in here, you'll see that I'm able to actually not have that content. Oops, let's make sure we set that back to HUD contents. There we go. I'm able to actually have a minimum width that works as expected. Now, obviously, we don't want a pink bar there, so there is another little trick that we can do, which is to actually set this height to 0. There's a little trick here where you can't just type in 0. You're going to always get 1 every time you do this, but you can actually round down by using one too many decimal places. So 0.001 will actually give you a 0 height, so you can actually hide that element in there. Again, your mileage may vary, depends on your team. Talk with your team, make sure that this is something you'd be willing to introduce. But what's nice about this one is that in the event, as we push forward with the auto layout, this is a really easy one to take out afterwards, right? It's not really conflicting with any of your design elements, and it's not going to really impact it long-term as well either. So.
Right, that was great. That was super great. You also whipped that out super fast. I was very impressed. I thought you were going to use our example we put together, and then you just like made it. All right, so we've got a question about, and I think it's a really good one, about like, can we create list elements, which we can, of course. In this case, we have an auto layout list item, and this was the holy grail, right? Like, can we have fixed, but can we expand the rest? And we can have fixed here, and then this child element of this auto layout frame is set to fill container on the horizontal axis, hug on the vertical. So now the question really is like, can we indent some of these items? And let's say in a real world where we have a design system, that design system may have like a to-do list item like this. So instead of all of these sort of just random frames, we've got a design system and we've got a bunch of these list items in. Can we override these, or do we have to create a whole new one for indented properties? Let's say that this is buy groceries, and then this is like, okay, what do we need? We need apples, we need bread. So these would need to be indented, right? So this is pretty easy with auto layout with independent padding now. All I have to do is come into this instance of this row, click on this over here, and let's just start putting in that padding. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but let's just say it's 56. So now we can actually do this with the independent padding over here, all the while still having this instance of a component. And I think this is ways that I've been thinking about, like, wow, how can we do overrides to like realign things spatially, especially in instances where that wasn't really possible. You can't really move the X, Y position of items in instances. So I think we have another example of this way at the beginning with this examples. Let's see what I got here. Yeah, so for instance, I had this nav, and let's just turn this thing into a component. In this instance, I thought, like, what happens when this starts to get smaller? Oh, like maybe we can actually, since everything is set up with auto layout, maybe in this instance, I'll just turn off the text. And then maybe in this instance, these are all instance overrides. I'm sure y'all are great at them. We can do that now too, right? Like we can just turn off the background of that field. Oh, this is great. But now we've got a problem, right? We've got this set to fill container, but we had a fixed width over here. So the whole UI is imbalanced. And then I thought, well, can we override this? Can we override the hug on the horizontal? And sure enough, we can, which is fantastic. So I started thinking about like instance overrides with auto layout, and I feel like there's a lot of great places to explore, as well as like, I can't wait to see what y'all come up with, how you sort of process this and the designs you come up with. So there's an answer to that question. Yeah.
I have a really important question that came in for the product team here too, which is, can we have cats for cursors, please?
I wish.
That's P0, I think.
For anybody who signed in on April Fool's Day may have seen that there were some cats floating around too. So
I have seen my cat floating around, designed by Willie.
I have another good one. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so someone had asked about using Smart Animate, which I think Smart Animate's an awesome feature. It's kind of like a multiplier for everything else that we make. So I can show something that's kind of cool for smart animating our auto layout properties. So this is actually an example. Miggy on Twitter showed this, and I thought it was really cool, so I wanted to play with it. And so what we have here is, I'll show you what we have. We have this auto layout frame, and it's all center aligned. And this middle one here is fill container, while these are just fixed things. And so what happens is we've animated the padding here. So here we got big padding, here we've got small padding. And what we can see is that when we animate it, it kind of shoots out like this carousel style thing. So you can use these auto layout features to kind of animate between some really dynamic properties. Yeah, just wanted to share that with people. I have no idea how to stop sharing my screen now.
That is so cool. I love that example. I had a question. Yeah, somebody could turn you off maybe. Either that or we're just going to awkwardly look at this amazing example that you've been sharing. So, all right, here's a question for, I've sort of collated these with a lot of different people asking the same question, and I hope that the product team, Annie and all of you can answer. The question really is like, what can we share about the roadmap for auto layout as we move forward? And in that question, there was a lot of, what do we do? What do we do about negative margins? What do we do about that min width example or max width? And then way back, I heard another question of, this is great that we have fill columns, but like, is there a way to say like, this is fill like in Flexbox, but it's only 10% of the width, and this is like 50% of the width. What do we think about all these ideas? It's a huge question, but you can handle it. Go for it.
Stumped them.
So what's the future roadmap for auto layout, and what are we thinking about, as well as some of these Flexbox-like things? And if it wasn't obvious, yeah, I was hoping that the product team could chime in just a little bit on that.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I got distracted for a second.
No problem. So the question, and it's kind of been reflected a lot in the chat, is like, what's the future roadmap for auto layout? What are we going to do about like min width, max width? Like a lot of the questions we're receiving a lot about like, can we wrap items? Like, can we have variable filled width items? So 10% of the column and then 20% of the column, et cetera.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have noticed that like we're kind of getting a lot closer to CSS Flexbox and features that kind of map to what developers are going to use. And it's my impression that we want to fill out a lot more of that so that you can design things dynamically here. I may not be correct in that. If someone who's closer to the product planning on that wants to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, generally, one of the interesting challenges of building auto layout is that Flexbox is incredibly complicated once you start sort of unleashing all of its powers. One of the big challenges with auto layout V1, V2, and the current one is basically finding like a really good subset of it. So it gives people like most of the power but doesn't overcomplicate it, right? Because we could literally have a CSS panel where we can type it Flexbox in Figma, but only a few people would enjoy it. So I think we want to like continue finding a thoughtful and not too complicated subset of it. And a lot of it is kind of up to actually everybody who's asking. Like a lot of the questions were, when is this coming? And our answer is like, oh, now we know this should be coming because you told us, right? So I think a lot of the roadmap is basically down to we're never really interested in just like matching Flexbox one-to-one, but solving actual problems that people have. So please just continue telling us what are the problems with auto layout v3 or what is it's not doing quite yet. And we'll figure out sort of how to help everybody solve these problems through auto layout or maybe even something else, who knows.
Yeah, and Lewis in chat makes a good point that it's not all about CSS. So part of the challenge here is to figure out like, what is the subset of layout algorithms that everybody uses? So if you're designing for iOS, you're not going to have CSS grid. So what can we build so that no matter what platform you're designing for, you have the tools you need to design this stuff?
Yeah, those are great. That's great. I think it goes back also to what Anthony was saying about how Figma really is like sort of the end platform agnostic. We're trying to make sure we're developing tools for people to design anywhere. So you got to take into account all those things. I can imagine how difficult that is to sort of synthesize all of that together. All right. Anthony, you got any questions you can answer?
Yeah, looks like we've got a great question here that's just around variants and using auto layout with variants, and just if there's anything to keep an eye on or any best practices or anything like that. And for anyone who missed it, we did an awesome auto layout stream, a variant stream about 2 weeks ago, just going through all the new amazing stuff that you can do with that as well. I gotta say, but with this one in particular, I think you can probably use it as safely in the sense that it's going to be a property on the frame, right? So any of your variants can have auto layouts. I'd be interested to see if anyone does anything clever with auto layouts on the actual variant component set frame, like on the actual component set frame, to see if there's anything kind of fun that happens there as well. But for the most part, I would just consider it like you're using another property on your frames, and you should be able to use it as expected in that case as well. Obviously, if anyone comes across anything either really cool or any areas that we may want to watch out for, please reach out and let us know, because that's how we can get the word out to everybody too. So,
Well, awesome. I think it's about yeah, I think it's about time that we're going to go ahead and start shutting down. But thank you everyone so much for all your great answers, and to our product design team, thank you so much for sharing your insights, telling us a little bit more about like your favorite moment or challenging moment in building this. We're so thankful for you. So let's share a few things. So for one, if you missed this recording or you didn't get all of it, a couple of things. Yeah, thank you, Anthony, for doing that. That's so great. I'm just going to go ahead and put a few links in the chat. So primarily, any upcoming video events that are going on with Figma, it's going to be at figma.com/events. So there's that. The other thing that we have is all of our recordings will be stored on YouTube. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that link for those. We have a lot of great information coming out and a lot of education around these features that are coming out, really doubling our efforts on that. So here is our YouTube page, youtube.com/Figma design, which apparently the link is not working. And then moving on, Anthony, can you go ahead and share a bit more?
yeah, absolutely. So I would, one of the things that you're going to want to look out for as far as where you can learn new things and where you can understand things is the community tab right inside of Figma. I mean, this is where I go for just about everything. So if you go to the community tab, you're going to see all the new files that are coming out, any new plugins and things like that as well. And you'll notice that we've got some new playground files that we actually have here as well. So you'll find the new auto layout playground file. This has been translated into a few different languages already. I know that there's more coming every day too. I generally come here to find new things and try to learn new things as well. So I make this a really good home for seeing what's going to be the latest new files that are out there. In fact, we already have several files that have gone out so far. And oh man, I keep losing my browser buttons. There we go. Let's get back there. Awesome. So a couple of things to point out that are in the community right now. It's just a little bit of a spotlight on a few things. So Trudeau has updated the tooltip component, now supports some of the new auto layout properties, which is awesome. Andrew Liebler, actually one of our own Figma, on the Figma team here, has put out a huge update to this awesome UI kit for sort of like a trip UI and scheduling UI, like a reservation UI kind of a thing. And then Rione did an update to some notifications that actually have some of these new auto layout properties. And you can sort of see that in some of the examples here. There are so many more that we would have loved to spotlight as well, but please add your own files, publish them to the community. We love to see new things that are out there as well. So yeah, that's that piece.
Amazing. And if we could just get like a goodbye from the product team, we'd love to see your faces again. And really, thank you so much for being a part of this with us, being with our community and making this for us.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, see you later, everyone. Thanks for coming to Office Hours. Hang with me and Anthony and our product design team and development team. We love y'all. Thanks so much for making all these great things, but as well as just asking great questions. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks for hanging out, everybody.